Sure.
ASD HISCON attendees and others that may watch this, Harold Buchanan again with my friend Volko, and we're here to talk about liberty or death. How are you doing, Volko?
Oh, I'm doing very well. I think we had a great AMREV gaming day, seems like. I did anyway.
Yeah, you did a little 7 Years wargaming as well.
Yeah, we did a little, well, preamble, but, I try to wedge myself in thematically where I can.
I think your argument was it's almost the American Revolution.
To paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, you go to the con with the games you design, not the games you wish to have designed.
That's perfect. It's been great, right? I spent some time with Mark Miklos, and of course his games are such a big part of our experience in the American Revolution.
Yeah, I watched some of the Newtown demo myself.
Yeah, very cool. And I was remembering as we went through that with him, I was remembering Saratoga, which was the first one I played, the first one he designed, right? Mm-hmm. And I played it much later. He said 1998, and
he designed that. Yeah,
that he designed it, and then he and that first scenario, right? The first meeting, it's the Freeman's Farm scenario, 4 turns, and it's perfection. It's so good. It is so tension filled. Every move matters.
Yeah.
And everything you do, and you have every unit, and the Germans are there, and and you can't cooperate with the Germans, and it's just natives and everybody.
And was it published in 98? Was that the year that sounds?
I believe that was his.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you think about 1998, and here's another thing is, I just think that the art for that as 1998 art, it's perfect. It's extraordinary. So like Roger did the figures on the colorful counters, we used that same Indian image for all the Indian units in Wilderness War because I liked it so much. And then the map is like, it's early. It's like the summer's ending, few of the trees are changing in upper New York. It was just gorgeous to play on. Nowadays, we have so many, but in those days, to me, it was striking.
Yeah. No, I loved it. And you and I have had the discussion about why we enjoyed games so much in the first place. And my answer, of course, was because I like to blow stuff up with airplanes and tanks. But you have cannons, right? I mean, and I got to tell you, I love Freeman's Farm, sitting across that big field and just popping those cannons. It's just fantastic.
Sure. Yeah. Well, in a tactical game, I think you want combined arms of some kind, right? And you want to see weapons differences. So yes, you have cannons, but then you've got you got to kind of position them in the clearing to get the most out of them. And you also have the riflemen.
Yeah.
And they play, the rifle plays its role as well. And then, so
Benedict Arnold.
And leadership.
Yeah.
Leadership as well.
Yes, varying qualities. Yeah, it's great. No, it's been fun, and the American Revolution is just I was trying to find a context to fit something in on 1776 because for most of us that was the big early strategic American Revolution game, and it was frustrating to me in so many dimensions. I have a copy and I want to go back and fight through it, but probably just because the rules were cumbersome and it wasn't designed to optimize rules. I think that's just that's the at the time, right?
Right. So it was so I would call that, I mean, it's the whole, it's all the colonies, right?
Can be, yes.
But it's operational, I think, in its focus. It's about, maneuvers and how, why do the battles happen where they do? How is it that battles come about? Is it operational context? And so you did a 1777 operational game design. And so you must have had 1776 in mind. Like what was the bridge for you between that game from the 70s and your more recent design?
The bridge. Well, I guess I can give you a conceptual bridge.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not sure exactly what you're asking for, but I'll give you a conceptual bridge.
So,
And that
to
is,
clarify, so the game, I mean, typically games have genealogy, right? We're
yeah.
inspired and we innovate and do something. So, if you had that frustration with 1776, was that in your mind at all as you're designing your 1777?
Well, it didn't positively influence it. Again, I need to revisit 1776. I think maybe
Mm.
you and I can spend a week together and do that
A
sometime.
week, yeah.
But
Try to
I
figure it out.
think that one of the things that 1776 lacked was it really didn't focus you down the paths that were critical to those operational outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's funny, right? Because in campaigns of 1777, you focus really on the Hudson River,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot going on around that, but the game ebbs and flows around what happens on the Hudson River, top to bottom, right, all the way
Mm-hmm.
from Canada through the
Right.
lakes. And I think that that's an interesting, that pathway was so important. And as a design, how do you make that pathway critically important to the outcome? Because
What
it
was,
was, right. That's really the
yeah.
theory that I'm
What was your
communicating.
solution?
It was just to make it impossible to go anywhere else unless you spent time on the river, right? I mean, there's just no mobility. There was no mobility
Yeah.
from Canada to what's
Yeah.
the New York town to
Albany or
yeah, probably Albany.
Albany.
I think it's
Yeah.
Albany. There's just
I,
no way to
if
there's
you
no way
mean,
to get there unless
right.
you
Yeah.
fight.
So that's in Wilderness War that, the
Mhm.
waterways are the highways. The water
Yeah, I
is the
saw
highways.
movement was 9 on waterways.
Yeah, boat movement is
Yeah.
9 and normal movement, if your light forces, is 6, and for conventional forces 4 and so forth. So yeah, and all the supply lines, they can go by road, but it's harder in the wilderness by road. It's easy by water, right? If you go to the Tidewater, Virginia, colonial era estates, these mansions, right? That were plantations. The front of the house, like when you drive up to go see that, you're driving up to the back of the house because the front of the house faces the river because that's your driveway, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so then we were at a stage of design in the 1970s that we didn't get the outputs right. We had some things happening in 1776 that were Revolutionary War like, I guess, enough. The game was a success as far as I know. I certainly knew it, but we got better at saying, well, now that output isn't quite right. We're going to use some mechanics to to give us more plausible outputs to the player's inputs, right? And that would be an example.
It's your question, right? And you've asked this before about the Civil War. Why did the battle happen here?
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
if you don't build in those factors that influence mobility and supply,
Right.
you'll never answer that question correctly.
Right. Yeah. In fact, I was thinking so I've written about like tactical, operational, strategic level, right? And how it's in, military doctrinal literature, it's hard to tease apart what those are and where the boundaries are. And we live by those terms in wargaming. And I thought of this kind of very quick formulation that the strategic level tells you why the operations happened, and the operational level tells you how the battles came about, and the tactical level is what happened in those battles. So it's kind of like why, how, what is a way to maybe kind of make it a mnemonic. And so, yeah, I actually, and I'm actually most taken with the operational level because I do think it kind of illuminates, and it needs to illuminate that especially. Why did this famous battle happen? Why did it happen? Where and how it did? Not that that's the only possibility, but what are the eddies and currents, right, in the maneuvers on a larger scale, still focused on the military as opposed to the political, social, economic stuff diplomatic that comes in with the strategic level. You're still focused on the military aspects, the military drivers, but what is it that drives battles here? And so you would like it to be, likely at least with similar decisions, like similar approaches by each commander, you'd like it likely that 1777 gives you a Saratoga in that part of the world, a Brandywine in that part of the world, and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, it's curious, and I also wonder whether it's happenstance, or if you modeled it 100 times, would you get 99 times it would be there, or is it?
Well, this is the Phil Sabin question: is what is your bell curve, right?
Yeah.
And we shouldn't presume as designers that what happened was at the middle and top of the bell curve. It might have been an unusual event, right?
Right.
And whatever we do when we design it, whether we're thinking about this is in Phil Samon's Simulating War book. I think it's a great insight. Whatever we do as designers, we are postulating, we're making a representation, Harold. We are postulating there was this bell curve because the bell curve of our game, in terms of whatever the question is, like, where do you get a big battle? The bell curve of the game is what we're saying the bell curve of history was. And it's not provable, right? It's all kind of our sense of things, right? We can never say, well, here were all the alternatives. And if we ran the 1777 campaign of the American Revolution 1,000 times, we get Saratoga's, 520 times. I mean, we can't do that.
Right.
But we can't avoid having a postulate, right? We are making a statement in our design. And that statement may be what happened historically was a fluke, right? That is a valid position to take. Now, we can then attack and defend that question, but we always have a position on that in our game design by looking at what the outputs are.
Yeah. Yeah. Ananda and Jason were talking about that this morning too, with regard to imperial struggle, right? That, that it was important at the same time, the American Revolution in that context was going to happen somewhere eventually. Right. And if you're the British, you don't want the first one to happen. And so you put more resources than you probably should into the stopping the, whatever you think is the next one.
And they were arguing that on the basis of that the French Revolution drew inspiration from the American Revolution. And so, bad luck for King George that it happened to Britain first before it happened to Louis,
Portuguese.
Right? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so now we are kind of on the strategic level, right, where you're getting into, why is it, in this case, why is it that such operations occurred, in the British colonies and not in the French colonies or France itself, right? And it doesn't mean, again, that Imperial Struggle has to produce that every time, right? But it should give you insight into how that came about, or could have, or how something different could have come about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it might be the mix of colonists, right? Because if you look at the Caribbean islands, for example, can you see the comments?
I'm just looking at them. Yeah.
Yeah, I can do something else to let you see them if you can't.
I can. I just had it on the wrong button. Now I can.
Good.
Please go on.
Good. Yeah. So the North American colonies had a much higher ratio of colonist to slave than the Caribbean and the Portuguese South America, right?
Right.
And maybe that was some part of the, you have this massive repressed by arms community, and it doesn't really matter how many of them there are. If there's enough arms, they can't rise. That you're prepared for that. It's when the colonists rise,
right, that
causes you the need to apply the military capital.
Yeah. So as a part of that if you have such a high ratio of enslaved people to free people, the free people can't afford. It's not the free people who are going to rebel. They can't afford that. They need to, that would be way too dangerous, right? You need to feel enough security from your own enslaved people if you're going to rise up against your crown, perhaps. Is that what you're referring to?
I guess that's one way to look at it. I was just, the Machiavelli wrote Discourses on Livy, and I don't know if you remember my early idea for a title for this, Liberty or Death, was A People Numerous and Armed, and I ended up, the long scenario is labeled A People Numerous and Armed, and that's a quote from Livy. Machiavelli said, look, this is the gist of it, that if you
Mhm.
have a contingency of people that are, subordinated to you, taxed by you, repressed by you,
Right.
and there's a lot of them and they have weapons, you're going to have
Yeah.
a problem.
Yeah.
Right?
And so is a part of the reason that they're so armed, numerous, I get that. I mean, is it the frontier? Is it the fact that there's a hostile frontier,
Yeah.
and a point is to expand into that and defend yourself against the
Well,
indigenous
that was
people?
certainly what they ended up doing, right? I mean,
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know if it was
because that takes a
designed.
lot of weapons.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
expanding, if you're on an island in the Caribbean, I
Yeah.
mean,
No, it takes a skill, right? They developed a skill for it to
skill
eat,
for fighting.
to defend, to fight, to
Yeah.
shoot, right?
So, speaking of Liberty or Death
Yes.
and its title, so maybe I think folks who don't know would be interested in why you called it what you did, title and subtitle, and whether you would choose that if you were designing that game today in 2026. Would you pick the same title that you did 10 years ago?
Well, it's an interesting question as to how I got there, right? So it was a first game. I really didn't have any. I did it for myself and friends and sent you, hey, look at this, just because I wanted you to see what you had motivated us to do.
And you happen to have it at Consim Expo.
And then I took it to Consim Expo, and you connected me with Gene, and I met with Mike, and there were a whole host of coin. I think Joe Topham was there, and
that makes sense.
Joel
He's nearby,
was there,
or was nearby then.
Yeah, there were a couple of other coin experts there, and so they just played it, and then Gene sat and talked to me about it, and he said, well, we'd like to do this, and I think, well, I just wanted you to see it, and so it was kind of shocking and great, because I said, I don't know how to do any of this. And he said, well, we'll get you the resources. And in fact, he said, as a matter of fact, if Volko wants to do it, then you'll be the work beside him and he'll do it. And I said, that's okay. I'm fine.
And I said something like, I'm not going near this with a 10-foot pole. What do you think? Are you crazy?
Well, we'll talk about what you said, because I think it's interesting.
Okay.
So at that point, then I just kind of jumped on, and Mike Berticelli was the designer. He was a series designer at that point, but he kind of ran with the development efforts and was great and helpful to me, because I didn't know anything, and he knew a lot about coin, and all of his suggestions were fantastic. So that's the path that I started down. Now, at some point, I said, I don't know what to name this. And I said, I have this idea of people numerous and armed, which means nothing to most people that don't read, Machiavelli or Livy,
right?
Which is a lot of people that don't. And so they started a process where the development crew, without my knowledge, basically did a vote amongst themselves as to what they liked.
So your team designing the game about rebellion was facing rebellion. Indeed.
Yes.
Yeah, the dynamics are playing itself out.
It wasn't rebellion. It was a well-executed
kind of a clientitis phenomenon. They're adopting the roles. I see.
Cool. So Mike says, what about a name? And he said, we've been thinking about these, and I'm trying to be political about it. And I don't know what a designer can decide.
You said you're trying to be political?
I'm trying. So these guys, so Mike says, well, let me ask Gene. I can't argue with that, right? He's the developer. He's going to go ask Gene. So he went to Gene, and he said, Gene recounts and was basically saying, hey, how about Liberty or Death, or People Numerous and Armed? And Gene said, Liberty or Death. And that was it. And he came back and he said, Gene wants to name it Liberty or Death. I said, all right, Liberty or Death it is. Now, in hindsight, it was an astute game name, because you knew what it was, right? Pat Mulville said, who's my good buddy here in San Diego, it's a great title, evocative of the topic. Right. It has a reference to Virginia, which you have to like.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
that's where it came from. That's where it happened. Now, in hindsight, I realized that I probably had the ability to go to Gene and say, hey, look, man, I really like, and Gene would have crinkled his nose, but he would have gone with it if I'd asked.
He would have crinkled. You're right.
Yeah.
That would have gotten you a crinkle.
I've seen the crinkle. You've seen the. I
I've
know
seen
you've
the
seen the
crinkle.
crinkle. Yes, yes. Recently seen the crinkle.
All right.
So I know he would have allowed me to do whatever I wanted to do if I felt strongly about it, right? Which is the great thing about working with those guys.
And I'm just to add, you mentioned, you made a reference there to Patrick Henry. I mean, that actually was going back to a people numerous and armed, right? That was in the context of our revelation of that war. That was a moment in which, we were armed and we had that kind of, do we go along with this or do we grab our arms and stand up to this? And you have this one speech that did circulate, through the colonies, and that certainly turned the Virginia legislature, which was going the other way, which was going in the accommodationist way at that moment, around to rebellion. So it actually, I mean, not only evokes the conflict, I think, more readily, but it actually evokes the same idea that you originally had in terms of, I guess, what the spirit of the game would be.
Yeah, no, it fits, and it was evocative, and it's kind of like the no taxation without representation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it means anything, but everybody's heard it, right? It's the greatest marketing slogan ever. Would the British have backed off or would the Patriots have backed off if the British had said, okay, send us 12 representatives, we're fine.
Right, right. No, that wasn't really, right. There's really much more. But what about the game's subtitle now?
Liberty or Death. Is there a subtitle?
Well, let's see. Hold on. Here we go. All right.
Oh, the American Insurrection. Yes, yes. That came from a gentleman named Volko Runka, I believe.
What's that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I kept saying insurgency, and you said no, it was an insurrection.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess maybe what I said, I mean, what I meant, I don't know what I said, but maybe what I meant was in terms of era, right? Like insurgency probably to me connoted 20th century, modern day, that we don't, it's the same thing, but, we don't apply that term in terms of what evokes, right? And I think I thought insurrection being something similar was evocative, much more evocative of 18th century.
In hindsight, I agree, right? Yeah. So I think it was the right answer. I can't imagine the the American insurgency. I'll tell you a funny story about that in a minute, but I try to I just have one funny story every interview.
Sure.
But the other,
we have our quota.
But there is evidence at the time by a writer about insurgencies that the British referred to it as an insurgency and wrote about it.
Fascinating,
which is very interesting, right? So it
wouldn't have been incorrect.
It wouldn't have been incorrect, but I think your word's the right word for the period, and just like Liberty or Death's a much better title than, People Numerous and Armed. Nobody knows the People Numerous and Armed. Yeah. So, but when after I left that crew and I created a prototype and a better map, a slightly better map, not a lot better.
It was an ugly baby, wasn't it?
Oh my gosh, it was ugly. It was a flow chart. It wasn't a map. It was a flow chart. Now the intersections between North and South Carolina were clear, but it was a flow chart. And so I went to WBC and met with you, and you and your son spent a ton of time with me, and it was great. And it was just wonderful. As a matter of fact, we discussed victory conditions at length at that meeting, but I had that set up on a table, and a guy comes by and he walks by and he looks at it. And it's the first person that I didn't know that I talked to about the game, right? So this is potential customer number one, steps up and looks at it. And he says, "Oh, what's this?" And I said, "Well, American Revolution." And I said, kind of the what did I say? The first, I didn't say Patriots. I don't remember what the term I used, but it was terrible. It was like rabble rousers or the first criminals or something like that.
Did you use the term préparer la guerre?
No, not until later. Not until Morgan Guillaume-Rotet coached me on French.
Okay.
But I used the I've got to remember what that was. It was terrible. And man, he was offended. He was pissed.
Oh.
And he huffed. and walk.
Because you were besmirching. You were
Yes,
besmirching. Was that?
the great
Okay.
patriots of American history, right? So he's probably wearing this shirt that I'm wearing today.
Yeah.
So I go talk to Gene about it afterwards and said, I had a funny interaction. And Gene, coached me and just said, well, how would you, how else could you have handled that? And it was great. And so
Coach
after some after some thought, I had better answers. And so he said, so a week later he sends me an email, says, hey, that guy sent me an email here it is. And it was a terrible email. Just said, this guy doesn't deserve to design a game for GMT.
Was Liberty or Death on P500 by that time?
I don't think it was at the time.
That's like got to be a record. Like, you're not even on P500 and you're already kicking the hornet's nest and causing GMT problems with its customer base.
I pissed people off long before you knew me, Volko. So, but yeah, that was good. I wish I could remember what I said, but it was terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly was to this guy. So,
yeah.
So insurrection is the right. I should have said they're just insurrectionists. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there you go. As they were.
What is it they used to say about the Irish? One man's something is another man's patriot.
Yeah, I don't know. One man's terrorist is another man's patriot.
That's it.
Freedom fighter. One man's.
That's what I said. I said terrorist. Volko.
You said terrorist.
Yes. Yes. And
does it have? Does it say terror on the markers like many other coin series? Do you do terror in? What do you do?
What do we do? We do.
It's prepare la guerre and rabble rousing. Yes, rabble rousing does sound a little more gentle than terror.
It sounds gentle as an action. Yeah,
insurrection. You do rabble rousing
than terrorist. But in a post 9/11 world, I just said the worst thing the guy could ever
activate, and you don't put the markers down in this one.
No, we do. Well, when the native faction raids, they create something. What is it?
All right. It's
in the counter.
They activate they place a raid marker. So similar, they're doing a similar thing to what happens in Wilderness War. Actually, they're placing a raid marker.
Yeah.
So that's a native thing.
Yeah, I didn't use the term terror.
No, you didn't. You learned your lesson.
I refuse. I will never.
You went back into your Word doc and you did a global replace terror with rabble rouse.
Yes, we're terrorist. It's no longer
we're rousing rabble. And did you so your answer to this guy was, well, they weren't patriots, they were rabble.
They were just rabble.
They were rabble. Somebody roused them up. That's all.
They were terrorists. Oh my God. The look on the guy's face, I knew it immediately as soon as I said terror. And I thought, not a good choice, but boy, is he pissed.
Wow. A letter to the president of the company. And the thing is,
raids and propaganda.
Yeah.
Yeah. Andrew Buckles there. Raids and propaganda.
So it is terror. You're just not going to call it that.
Yes.
You had your fingers burned on the hot stove and you recoiled like a human being.
Think about this whole idea of tar and feathering and riding someone out on a rail, right? Where they would seat someone on a fence rail and then they would bounce them out of town, these tax collectors.
Right.
And many people died from riding that rail because it would cut their bodies, right? In terrible places. The idea of tarring and feathering, where you're boiling tar and dipping a human being into it, will also cause death.
Yeah.
It's horrifying.
Right. Well, it was not just an insurrection; it was a violent insurrection.
It was mobbed, right? It was those were mobs.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Yeah,
I've changed my mind on that. They're not terrorists anymore, though.
No, you've changed your mind. Okay, yeah. Well, again, see, the thing is, for me, terror and political terror and terrorism and terrorist all they evoke a different era than the 18th century for me in the English language. It doesn't mean it's just we tend to use certain words in certain contexts, even if the meanings are only very subtly different. So, and it's not, I mean, just another example of that when I studied terror and what political terror was, it wasn't referring to terrorism. It was referring to state terror, like in the East Bloc. You know, we talked about political terror by the state to maintain control of people, as opposed to acts of terrorism to gain attention to a cause, you know, by attacking a soft target and so forth. So yeah, so this kind of, like I say, the connotation changes. That's all.
Yeah.
So I think it's right. I think games, I mean, we communicate by game mechanics, sure, but we also communicate by the art, and we communicate by the terminology we use. And we're trying in all those cases, or we should be, to transport our players into a certain time and place. And we're doing it in English. And so we ought to harness properly what the, you know, the what's evocative in the language to get you there. So
yeah, I spent a lot of time with the words, right? I mean, I spent a lot of time with the words and the words in the cards and the I mean, you talk about prepare la guerre, right? It's French, but it's French, right? It's the French.
Right.
They're preparing for war against the British. Of course it's French, right?
Right.
And the you know,
and because you're, you know, in some part of your mind, you know, again, this is play. We're adults, we're interested in history, but it's play. In some part in your mind, you're imagining you're the French authority, the French court, the French general, you know, issuing an order.
Yeah.
You know, and you're telling your, you know, your scribe or whatever, your aide de camp, you know, take your feather quill and write down. What are you going to do? Well, you're writing it in French. And even if I don't know French, it can still trigger my imagination that way. Yeah. I'm the French commander.
Yeah, I came to your house once and we were playing.
Did you?
Combat Commander Pacific. You weren't aware. You weren't there.
I mean, just came to your terms house. Of the bell curve, we probably were playing Combat Commander Pacific.
Yes, so we're playing Combat Commander Pacific.
Yeah.
And I walk into to your office and sit down, and there's an altar there with all of your World War II Pacific memorabilia.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, my little
music playing that's evocative of the time and the place.
There's like Vietnam, and there in the corner, if you zoom in the corner, is my South Pacific shrine. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
So
well, I
good.
like,
but see, that's, I mean, that's immersion, right? That's role playing.
Yeah. You've got incense, if it's Japanese incense, the music, the food. Yeah, I like to do it all. You know, it's all media, and they're all mutually reinforcing, right? And the way words and art and mechanics do that in a game. So yeah, I go the distance.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. So a couple of funny things. One is when I started talking to you about this game, one of the first questions you gave me, which was, look, you're basically saying this doesn't work for the American Revolution. How do you have a Saratoga in Liberty or Death, right? In a coin system, how do you have a Saratoga?
Yeah.
And, my answer to you was that Saratoga is like 3 or 4 different cards and events that all happen at the same time, right? I mean, that happen in sequence, right? Where your army gets stranded and you're stuck in New York and there's no way to get out, and it's nearly the end of the turn, and these critical events happen, and then you're out of supply and you can't. You just end up losing your army. It's a series of cards or things that happen that are outliers, but could happen. And but I in talking to Gene later, Gene said, "How in the world can Mark Herman and Volko have both said you can't have an American Revolution coin game." So I want to give you the chance to defend yourself. You guys had just finished, or you were finishing, Fire in the Lake.
Yeah.
So what's the conspiracy here against the American Revolution?
Against the American Revolution, yeah. So I don't know. I plead misquotation, but here might be the thought, and I can definitely see how I would have asked, how can you have a Saratoga, and kind of what do I mean by that? And so there are premises to the mechanics featured in the coin series, at least in the first 4 volumes. And they are designed to do certain things and not do other things. They were focused on national level modern insurgency, counterinsurgency as multifactional conflicts. That's, the kind of, this form was trying to get its arms around. And so what characterizes that guerrilla warfare characterizes that. We took a step toward conventional in Fire in the Lake, but it's a pretty simple step where the main thing is still, even the NVA in the US period was largely fighting like guerrillas. So even that is a half step. And we're talking about incremental attritional warfare where we don't have to we can have deterministic fighting be common because of the kind of the statistical effect of lots of little engagements, will tend to average out to a predictable result. And we're fighting our guerrilla warfare that way. And now into that, we're going to have an 18th century conventional war of maneuver in which we have decisive political and military effects coming from big battles. And the existing coin series mechanics as of Fire in the Lake, it probably seemed to me, and maybe to Mark as well, aren't going to handle that well. And so what I was not able to imagine at that point was how different designers transporting us to different settings could make the experience, the simulation, while retaining enough of that core engine, right, that we can identify it as coin series, that we can get. And when I say that identified, I mean you get a payoff if you've learned Fire in the Lake. If you've gone through that process of learning how Fire in the Lake plays, it's going to be pretty easy to learn Liberty or Death. Okay, even though, yes, guess what? Combat is going to be different because we're going to tend to have big decisive battles that cannot be deterministic for the model to work. We have to perceive risk in allowing this battle to come out. And then the outcome of that battle needs to be more than just attritional results, right? We need to have some momentum-like, political-like effects that build off of a victory or defeat in one of these larger battles, like a Saratoga. So I think probably that's what I meant when I said, how could it happen in the coin series given what the combat mechanics are, right? And indeed, you came up with a whole new combat mechanic that I think remains unique in the series. Because why? Because you want plausible outputs to your players' inputs to take them to the American Revolution. And I think it's
agreed. And I think that the existence of risk in that combat is important, but the other thing that's important is the ability to manage the risk. Right? You can't eliminate the risk, but you certainly can apply types of soldiers, different, ensure that you're in supply, a variety of other things that affect the modifiers, right? You're rewarded or penalized,
right,
to manage that risk. And I think that was also important. So it was interesting. It got me started arguing with Mark Miklos, right? Which is always a mistake on the details of Saratoga. And his perspective was Saratoga was just a grand victory and it was a grand victory, but it was a fait accompli by the time the two armies met, right? The British Army
saying the operational situation was so dire.
They were overextended. They had been picked apart. The natives had left, and they had a handful of days of supply and no fortune as to where
and Oriskany and Fort Stanwix meant there would be no reinforcement from the west.
From the west, for sure,
that had been anticipated.
Yeah,
and then of course, it was Howe
and Howe's decision to go to Philadelphia,
to Pennsylvania. Yeah.
So I think that in my mind, Saratoga is the end of a long series of terrible choices and bad outcomes.
Right.
But anyway, that's that. So I just wanted to give you some grief. I've never talked to Mark about that. I need to talk to Mark about it. And he'll just say, no, that was probably Volko. I think it's
you give Mark a good crinkle.
Yeah. Well, I got a crinkle from you on Liberty or Death. Can I talk about our crinkle?
Sure.
So I honored the rules as much as I could, right? So I really went out of my way to honor the rules and the standards that you'd set in because I think the game's great, right? I mean, as a designer, I didn't have to design a system, right? I just took your system and then hung some American Revolution off of it, which was much easier than designing something from scratch. But I think that at one point I had made a decision to, when the propaganda round, right? The winter quarters card comes up.
Mm-hmm.
That as soon as you see it, the
Right.
turn stops.
Right.
And you said what? And I said, well, when it comes up, it's play stops, and then you'd go through the interim round.
Mm-hmm.
And you looked at me and you crinkled your nose. And you said, "That's bold."
Yeah, because it's fundamental, right?
Yeah,
It's
it was core.
it's surgery. It's deep surgery. That's probably why I said bold. Yeah. Well, bold's not a crinkle necessarily.
Yeah. Well, I got a crinkle.
Is that a
I
crinkle?
know it.
Okay.
We can talk to
Yeah.
Mike. If Mike Berticelli was here, he would say, "Yeah, crinkle."
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. And then what it reminds me of, because sometimes you can't imagine it until somebody imagines it for you. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so, for example, in the coin series, now universally, you get to look one card ahead, right? You get some tactical warning. Like, we're playing this card, and probably two of us will play on this card, but that card's coming, and two others of us will play on that card. And from that knowledge, a lot of tactical decision making and possibly even wheeling and dealing can flow, right? And so you'd think, well, that's so fundamental, That wasn't there originally in the first design of Andean Abyss. You just flipped a card and played it. You flipped the card and played it. That was it. And I think it might have, I don't know if that was Joel Toppin or Wendell Albright, but somebody that I was testing with then kind of brought up, well, that would be kind of a cool thing. And I thought, okay, that'd be a kind of a cool optional rule, that we're going to give you some tactical warning. So it wasn't at all. It was an evolution. It was development, right? It was development of the form.
Yeah.
And now we're like, well, of course, that's fundamental.
Yeah. Visualizing the cards was a development, right? I mean,
it so much, right? So this is the thing. Everything is an evolution, and you get so much, innovation by people sharing each other's ideas and taking this thing from this person and putting it in that way and so forth. Yeah. And I think the coin series story has been that. So that is true. And I think then Morgane liked that innovation so much that she put that in it, with a slightly different twist as well. But I think her twist was you just switch the two cards, right? So that event, you don't get cheated out of that event. You just delay it one, but you still don't have warning in terms of, and so we made it an option.
Yeah.
That's the liberty you switch it. Okay. Yeah. And in Falling Sky, we put it in as an option too, called it Early Winter. And it also makes some sense. It depends on what that card represents. So you have winter quarters, right? In Liberty or Death is kind of the right. Do you call it that, winter quarters, instead of propaganda?
Winter quarters.
Yeah. Okay. So you are evoking annual events we kind of know winter's coming, right? We get some sense. Oh, it's starting to turn. Campaign season is ending. Right. This is going to be a colder than usual or warmer than usual December or whatever. So it also makes thematic sense that you would,
be surprised perhaps.
Well, so that then you seeded them.
Yeah.
You seed them, right? You construct
we stick them in the last 4 or 5 cards and shuffle.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the earlier volumes didn't do that.
Yeah.
Because they're not really representing anything. They're just a juncture where you
measure stuff.
So now it comes up. It could come up very quickly. It could come up in a long time, but at least you have that huge uncertainty of when the scoring round is, if you like, the victory check and all the other stuff. But at least you get a card warning.
Yeah.
Okay. You get a little bit of warning. In your case, you have a much smaller range. When does winter come? But then we don't need that warning.
Yeah.
It's like a ripple effect, right? We don't need
that. And good players will sit around and talk about how many cards do we have left, right? How many cards
you can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that range of uncertainty at the outset of each campaign is much greater in Andean Abyss than it is in Liberty or Death. So again, the pluses and minuses, to the degree there are any, are different because other things are different that affect it, right? The balance changes. So you have to, when you're developing, you take these ripple effects into account.
A couple of things I wanted to thank you for. When we agreed to do when Gene agreed to do it and apply resources, I was so thankful for. But I said, I also need some of Volko's time, and so you agreed to meet on. I think we met Sunday evenings for an hour,
Okay.
and I was disciplined. I tried to be courteous with your time and keep it to an hour, but that time was invaluable, Volko. It was your coaching time was extraordinary in making this work, and I just very much appreciative of your willingness to spend the time with me on that.
Well, thank you. So, you mentioned victory conditions, and I do recall, and I think it was at WBC, we had, kind of a conversation, and my memory of it is I didn't really know what they should be, but I was coach-like trying to help you focus on what do you think, boiled down, right? Simplified, what do you think your factions that you've chosen as the 4 key actors in the conflict, like what were they after, what were their goals that formed their strategies, and that's how the victory conditions came to be. Now, I don't know if you've heard this, but those victory conditions are controversial. Have you heard that?
So they're the second most controversial issue. The other one is the inclusion of the French and the Indians.
The French and the Indians, right? Yeah.
Which to me is that's the greatest irony, right?
The faction choices. So these are like two really core things in games. They're like, who do the players represent, and what are they trying to do to win?
Yeah.
Right?
No, look, here's the funny thing. I get, and you probably get as a result, because it's your baby as well. It's just tons of great feedback for the game, and it's highly rated, and it's we're coming up on the 4th printing. So it's just a wonderful success as a game, right? And people love it and play it.
Yeah.
I run into people at every convention that are playing it, right? That I walk up on that are playing it. Right. So it's not, and I also know that it's the game you play the most of all the coin games with your son.
We had a holiday tradition, and we played it 2-player actually, which bears on this, right? We played it we thought it was great to have the paired fact, the British and the Indians and the Patriots and the French go at each other. Indeed, we did. Yeah. Yes. And it's also, by the way, it gets a lot of commentary, hats off to Terry Lee. It gets a lot of commentary about how come they don't make coin games as beautiful as they used to be when they made Liberty or Death, right?
No,
so there's that.
Yeah, he's a gem, and everything he does makes me look like a better designer. There's no doubt. But the interesting thing about the victory conditions is that it gets tons of positives, but it's this small group that's rallied around. And I think there's a title called "Let's Fix This Game" on PGG.
Right.
And I weighed in and I said, look, the game's fine. I'm completely fine with it. But if you all can come up with something better, I'm happy to overlook it. Now, the problem too is that the solo game developer, right, Ordeon, has become very vocal in his disdain for me, perhaps, but more importantly for the victory conditions. So, so there's a tiny contingent of insurgents.
So let me, because I want to take advantage that you have this podium, and because I want to ask, because I have my kind of views and explanations, but let me just like encapsulate how I understand the controversy and ask you directly what that is simulating. Okay, because you did make the choice looking to history. Yeah, I think you fashioned those factions and what they're trying to achieve. And so here it is. You've got essentially there's 2, bad marriage partners, as you find in other coin games, and victory is around the support or opposition for the crown, opposition to the crown. And if the British or the Indians have that support for the crown high enough at the end, they have a chance of winning. If the opposition is high enough relative to the support, then it's the Patriots or the French who are winning with opposition to the British crown. Okay. Yeah. But then within, so that's, pretty clear and not, surprising. It's a revolution. So then within that, the 2 partners now have to decide who won. And if they're doing well, then the one of them that wins is the one that's doing the best on their particular victory condition against their kind of most opposed opposite number. And that is the British versus the French, who are in this larger imperial struggle there. And the Patriots and the Indians, who are, fighting over who's going to get to rule North America or west of the Proclamation Line and so forth, right? So they're opposed. And then we're counting something totally different. And so for the Indians and the Patriots, we're counting what is their basis of strength, I think, for continuing their conflict, right? Patriot forts and Indian settlements as a measure of that. And then we have the French and the British. It's, we had a conversation about what are the French trying to achieve here, and they're basically trying to hurt the British, in an imperialist way, and the way that they do that. Hey, Mike, the way they do that is casualties. So you have these combined British casualties. How many forts and troops, regular troops, I think, have they lost, and then combined rebellion casualties, which is how many have the French and the Patriots lost. And so here's the kind of the controversial bit now, that if you're looking at who does better in the end, the Patriots player or the French player, the Patriots want to have lots of forts and few Indian settlements. The French player wants to have higher British casualties than French Patriot casualties. And so there's this opening for the Patriot player, because the Patriot player can to some degree generate Patriot casualties, that if what the Patriot player is looking, they're thinking they're going to win on opposition, but now they want to come out on top of their French ally, they can purpose to take more casualties or at least hold off from causing British casualties, so that the French ally is disadvantaged in that final comparison. So then the question is, what, you designed it that way, and the kind of I don't know if the word quirk is fair, but the quirk is that the combined casualties that matter for French victory include not just French casualties versus British, but also Patriot casualties, and that the French, to win, want to keep Patriot casualties low, while the Patriot player doesn't care about that as much, or may even have the reverse incentive. So what is the simulation defense of that?
Well, that's the longest sentence I've ever heard in my life, Volko. So
I didn't promise a sentence, but I understand you're going to give this exposition now.
I'm not sure. I had in business school, I had a classmate from Germany, and I used to joke whenever he would talk, I'd like to ask a statement.
I'd like to ask a statement.
So,
yeah.
Okay. Hey, let me take just a minute to welcome Mike. Mike, I just noticed you were in the green room. Great to see you, and welcome to the cast. We've got 3 minutes after
the longest question ever.
Yes. I'm not going to answer the longest question ever.
I didn't know it was a question when I popped in, and also at the end it was a question.
Mike,
all right. I knew it. No representations, no defense will be offered.
Volko. We have 4 minutes. We have 4 minutes. I want Mike to have a chance to talk a little bit about his experience and anything he wants to say about liberty or death.
Well, you need to answer that question. That was a lot of work to ask that question.
That's why I don't want to answer it.
That's my mistake, to expect a payoff.
But look, it's victory conditions are a really odd abstraction, right? If the Indians win in liberty or death, that doesn't mean that the United States of America is a native entity, right? None of that. The Indians could win liberty or death, but still had a really bad path ahead, right? They were in trouble regardless. So it's not traditional. The other thing that's important about liberty or death is I made it hard to get back stuff when you need it from one side without cooperation, right? Some of Jordan's feedback early on, Mike, was, well, the Indians can't do anything to hurt, these other factions. And I said, but by design, right? You have to work together to an end, and maybe get the other side get the cooperating side to do something that they don't necessarily want to do. And so the game's full of that stuff.
Yeah, because
if you're telling me that someone can do something that doesn't advantage you, that's true. They can do weird stuff. But if you watch the games, it doesn't happen, right? And it happens oddly, right? But it really doesn't happen. So I'm not going to change the design to eliminate something that is a potential problem that isn't a real problem. So you know, and by the way, early on, my view was it should be Patriots and French against British and natives, and that's it. And so it's 2-on-2.
You win or lose. The British and Indians win or lose together.
Yes, which you can play the game that way. But Mike, great to see you. What do you think about Liberty or Death and at 10 years looking back?
Well, it was interesting. You guys were just talking about Liberty or Death was the first kind of coin game to go out of modern time, right? And this victory condition, I think, might have been. We really didn't have that much of an. How do I want to say this? Issue, not really issue, but in the earlier volumes, because of the being back in time, and things were just a little different. No, okay.
Yeah, we can hear you. Gotcha.
Okay,
You're good.
Yeah. I think that's definitely the first kind of historical, right? Certainly followed by Falling Sky, but the first really super historical treatment. So there were things there that we had to cover that weren't.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say it was the first one too, where this gets back to this word like insurgency or insurrection, but it's the first one where where coin, the shortened term, right? You wouldn't associate it again with the setting because it was older. We associate that term with 20th, 21st century insurgencies. And so, yeah, it was the first one. It was the first volume where we would establish, well, the coin series, it's called the coin series, but it doesn't mean we're just doing modern counterinsurgency. Right.
Yeah, true.
Well, I know for me, with Liberty or Death, that was the one, the one that I probably was most involved in the design portion.
Yeah.
Because, working with Volko on all the other stuff is, my job's pretty easy with Mark Herman and Volko. But this was
with Harold.
This was Harold's first game.
Yeah.
But Harold, I mean, it was easy because he knew his stuff with the whole the whole subject and everything. But I really enjoyed all of the interaction. It was one of my favorite, development jobs that I've done, because I felt Harold and I worked really well together. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. No, Mike and I became good friends out of that, and started work on a couple of other things that really were just based on the relationship. But without Mike, I couldn't have done it. It was, I didn't know what I was doing or what to do. And every now and then, every time I'd have a discussion with Mike, he would say, "Hey, what about this? Why don't we add this? Why don't we add?" And it was all very well thought out. This whole idea behind the fleets and the blockades, that's all Mike's idea, right? I mean, that's from the start. And it's a brilliant application of naval power, simple application of naval power, given the imbalance, right? The British could control as much as they wanted, but the French could come in periodically. And I thought that was great. So I've got to get to the next piece. I wish we had more time. Mike, great seeing you. And both of you guys had a great impact on Liberty or Death and my work and my formation and the way I think about things now as a designer. So I'm just couldn't be more appreciative to both you guys. And with that, it was good seeing you, and we'll just call it a day. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks for putting this on.
Bye-bye.